Whoop. Hi, everybody. I'm going to set my timer lest I bore you for 45 minutes. My name is Vidya. I'm a recovered alcoholic. It's good to see everybody here today. I have a great deal of reverence for Alcoholics Anonymous. It saved my life. And I have a home group. That's probably the most important thing is I've got a home group. I have a service position in my home group. And I have a sobriety date of 12/23/2009. I have a sponsor, and I am actively taking other people through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Sometimes we get a little confused about what the AA message is. It says, carry this message, and this message is the first 164 pages. I know that because it's on the inside dust cover of the third edition, which is, it's kind of funny. You find these little nuggets of what AA is, and it's such a simple thing. You kind of confuse it with a lot of other things. And so I never really know exactly what I'm going to talk about. And since nobody raised their hands as being excessively new here today, I realize this is a beginner's meeting, but I didn't see any hands come up. It sounded like most people here are well underway. And so that's a little terrifying, at least it was for me, because, that first initial breakthrough in Alcoholics Anonymous was only the first one. And I wish I could give you a page number, but it's in As Bill Sees It, which means it's in language of the heart most of the time. Bill talks about, is the first awakening all there is? And he says, no. The first awakening is just the first one. To mature, this must go on and on. And so this is why I live in the disciplines. I have taken steps 1 through 9. And then if I notice in page 84, 83, 84, the middle paragraph, it says I continue to do those things. And in one paragraph, I see steps 4 through 12. 4 through 12 daily as a way of life. And so what I used to believe, I used to see the steps as being linear, and I don't see it that way anymore. I see it as being expansive. I see it as being something that grows not only up, right? Because I have a tendency to want to ascend. I see it now as ever expanding in all directions. And that's a different take on it than what I had when I was new. I have been exposed to AA since July. This is my first big book. It's trashed. And since July of 1989, I've been reading this book, and I started with this, with pride. Pride's a tricky thing because ego can trick you into some behavior I wouldn't have ordinarily taken. And when I first was exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous, I could see that you people were going to ask me to read. And so I got the book, and I recognized that what we call table copies today, I recognized that we were going to be reading from a table copy, and that the parts that we read were highlighted. And I was terrified to read out loud, absolutely terrified to read out loud to you. So when I got my book, I grabbed the table copy, took it home, and highlighted everything out of the table copy at the Oakhurst Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I grew up at the southern entrance of Yosemite National Park, and the group I went to was called the Oakhurst Fellowship. So I lived right there on Highway 41, an unbelievable treasure trove of life happening, and yet it's running between my fingers like sand. But I took the book home, and I highlighted all of those things, and I sat at my table or my bed or wherever it was I happened to be, and I read and reread chapter 5, more right, chapter 3, all this things that we read at the beginning of the meetings. I read and reread that. And we also read a little excerpt from Keys of the Kingdom. And we also read the first 2 paragraphs of Appendix 1. And I think that may have been the single most important thing that I really got, where it says Alcoholics Anonymous, of alcohol. It says, to those now in its fold, Alcoholics Anonymous has made the difference between misery and sobriety, and often the difference between life and death. AA can, of course, mean just as much to uncounted alcoholics not yet reached. And here the biggest word is therefore. No society of men and women ever had a more urgent need for continuous effectiveness and permanent unity. We alcoholics see that we must work together and hang together, else most of us will finally die alone. And so something I noticed in your format, in your script, was, paying attention to singleness of purpose, because I wasn't focusing on my alcoholism, and it almost killed me because I had some outside issues. None of my outside issues are drugs, by the way. I'm not a drug addict. I don't even understand drug addiction. But I understand this one thing that differentiates. And here's what happened when I came in, as I almost memorized chapter 3, chapter 5, and that little excerpt from Keys of the Kingdom. It was so beautiful. I still have the key around my neck. All we need is the key of willingness. Willingness precedes everything. And so, in the doctor's opinion, when I, began to actually, my first exposure to AA was 1989. I have 2 sobriety dates. One is the one I gave you, and I count the other one only in as much as it illustrates for me what can happen. That line on page 85 that says it's easy to let up on your spiritual program of action and rest on your laurels, that's no lie. Because I'm going to 5 meetings a week, and I'm sponsoring 3 girls. And with just under 8 years of sobriety, I drank. I looked good on the surface, but I seriously, guys, my first sobriety date was June 10th, 1998. I still cling to that a little bit because it was the birthday of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I literally gave it back. I said, no, thanks God, that's not good enough, right? I rested on my laurels. I paid lip service to steps 10 and 11, where I continue to take a personal inventory, continue to set right new mistakes, and that beauty of the growth steps. I think I just tried to maintain what I already had, but without growing, it got real squirrely, and alcoholism was alive and well. And so when I look back, when I finally began to really study this, alcohol had its way with me for the 9 years, the first when I showed up, and then about 9 years later, I come in thoroughly whooped. And I'm looking at this thing, and it says, it's talking about the physical craving once I start to drink. And the doctor's opinion really hammers that point home. And all I could really see when this was going on is I knew I'd come in to AA, and I'd sit there and I would look at the steps. In the fellowship where I was, somebody had done a homemade version of them, so they were horizontal across the wall. And I'm looking at that powerlessness over alcohol, and my life is unmanageable. I got that I was powerless over alcohol, but I always added my own words to it, but only when I drink it. I never understood the powerlessness that preceded the next first drink. I seemed to be able to get physically sober and stay that way for long periods of time, upwards of a year. But ultimately, and I'm right there in Fred's story, and the jaywalker and Jim, we introduced to these beautiful people, right? And some of them are fictitious. The jaywalker, there doesn't seem to be a human attached to that. It's an analogy. But there's people attached to the rest of them. And so I didn't understand. I understood the physical allergy, and here's what differentiates the alcoholic from anybody else. That includes, for me, it includes drug addicts, food addicts, gambling addicts, sex addicts. This one thing that makes an alcoholic different And it says it right here, and it's beautiful. It says all these and many others. It just got finished describing different personality characteristics, not just of alcoholics, but of all people. And it says all these and many others have one symptom in common. And didn't we just discuss that right in your format? You mentioned our common welfare. We have a common problem and we share a common solution. The common problem is mentioned on page 17, right? Our common suffering, shipwreck. We're rescued from shipwreck. But it says that would never have held us together. That's only one element in a powerful cement that now binds us. Now what we have is a common solution. So then this says I have one symptom in common. One, they cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. And it says this phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy, which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. And my outside issue happens to be food. But alcohol was the one thing that I could not let go of. Was able to let go of everything else, but I could not. This alcohol had a grip that I couldn't figure out. And it says, sets them apart as a distinct entity. And I had to ask some real hard questions, right? And I had to look at that idea about, what is this about? I watched my own mother die of alcoholism. I was 13 when she passed away. The woman was 5'10". She weighed 92 pounds when she passed away. She was covered with bed sores. She was yellow. And all she wanted was bourbon. She drank early times, bourbon. And that's all she wanted at the end. And the doctor said, go ahead, give it to her. She's not long for the earth. And so I figured as long as I didn't get like that, I'm fine. As long as I don't get like that, I'm fine. As long as I don't get like that, I'm fine. And because I could go for long periods of time. So I had, my first exposure to actually drinking was Everclear. And I drank it in the front seat of my boyfriend's Bronco. We were going to go to a movie. And so he had, I don't know, I'm pretty young. He had a bottle of Everclear and squirt. And so we'd drink a little bit of the Everclear and then chase it with some squirt. And at least I think it was squirt. It may have been Fresca. I know the bottle was green. Okay, that's all I really know. The bottle of soda was green and the bottle of Everclear was clear. I don't think it had a label. It may have been homemade. I really don't know. But I can tell you that I woke up the next day with sticks, vomit, and dirt. And I had no recollection of what had happened. I had become vicious, violent, and vulgar. I heard another AA member, my friend Deborah, use those three words. And that's what had happened. And so I thought that was diagnostic of alcoholism, right? The vicious, violent, vulgar. Turns out that that's just the way I react when I get drunk. There's a lot of drunks that don't become vicious, violent, and vulgar. The key element in that diagnosis, that moment, was that once I put that first thing of Everclear, I don't stop drinking until I black out, pass out, or run out. My friend Carrie says that. And these things, when you hang out long enough, someone else tells the story better than I can. And so what happens is then I accelerate. And one of the things I distinguished was the idea that, when I'm using outside issues, I never did it that way, right? I never did stuff to excess, but alcohol was not that way. Once I introduce it to my system, I drink fast, I drink hard, and then I black out. God forbid. I wish I would pass out first, but I don't. I black out. I do all kinds of crazy stuff, which is still not alcoholism. It's still how most people react. Most people have crazy behavior when they're drunk. But this idea that then I don't need to drink. And so I said, I'll never do that again. I will never do that again. And I did it again. And I did it again, and I did it again. That was I thought it was isolated like at 16 years old, and I really didn't get into very much trouble with alcohol again until I was in my mid-20s. I just stayed away from it because that wasn't the lifestyle I wanted to lead. It wasn't. I didn't hang out with the bad kids. I was the consummate good kid, a rule follower. I'm outstanding. I do good at my job. I have these positive things going on for me, but what I don't know is that the clock is ticking. Tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. I'm going to drink again, but I don't know this because I don't understand the second feature of alcoholism, which is brilliantly described on page 23. But first, before I get there, I'd like to draw attention to this, to Roland Hazard's story on page 27. Excuse me. Where Carl Jung tells Roland, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. And he says, I've never seen one single case recover where the state of mind existed to the extent that it has in you. This was Roland's first step experience. And I drank until I had that first step experience, until I knew. I went from the person who would say things like, I'm an alcoholic, I can't drink. All right? Because that just seems so normal. The bottom line is, the alcoholic of my type, the type that's described in this book, is I'm an alcoholic and I'm going to drink, and there is nothing I can do about that. Nothing. So this is where I had this moment. I had a moment, and it's the same one that Roland had. And it says, our friend felt as though the gates of hell had closed on him with a clang. And all the other AA literature comes to mind. Now remember, because I had memorized chapter 5, chapter 3 in a moment of pride, it came back later because God is so tricky this way. Came back later, and I have now a little bit of a head full of AA and a belly full of vodka at the time. And I realized that I'm not alone in this room. And it says, where Bill says in his story, he says, if there's a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. And all of a sudden, in a drunken state, I have a little moment of clarity, which I think is kind of weird. But I had that moment where it's like, I felt like I was being hunted. And then now it says alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. All of this attempt to not sound stupid, I had actually ingrained AA literature into my thought process, and these things come up. And the one thing that came up that day, I can describe it if I had the whole hour, but was the idea that I stood at a turning point. I stood at a turning point, and I recognized in that moment that it wasn't that I can't drink, it's that I'm going to. I'm absolutely going to. It had been repeated time after time after time, but I didn't see it. And so turning to page 23, I just love it. Up until page 23, the big book is talking about the physical part, the physical allergy, which I could see. But on page 23, it turns around, starts to turn around at page 21 when it says, it gives me the differentiation between a hard drinker, a moderate drinker, and then it says, but what about the real alcoholic? Right? He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. See, and I'm comparing myself to my mother, who was a continuous hard drinker, and I never did drink that way. But it says, but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. We're still talking about the physical part. And read down a little further, a little further. The baffling feature. Up at the top of page 23, it turns it around and it says, these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink. It's not talking about anything but drinking here. Thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. And here's, I didn't get this for the longest time. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. You mean I don't, it's like, how do you, look, I read there's a little, I'm a fan of the Oxford group. And there's a line in this little book from the Oxford group that says a person can look at something 999 times and not see it. And then look at it this one more time and it's, right? Mind blowing. So it says, therefore, the main problem with the alcoholic centers is his mind rather than his body. If you ask him why he started on that last bender, he'll have 100 alibis. So the point came where I was out of answers. I could always, because I'm a master manipulator, blamer. My husband he was always in my crosshairs. Whew, man. So our marriage was tumultuous. Alcoholism was our glue. He'd ask me, why do you do this, Benny? Well, he called me honey. He never called me by my name. Honey, why? Why do you keep doing this? And I ran out of answers. I became Roland Hazard. The gates of hell had slammed shut. And finally, the point came where I had to say, I don't know why I do this. Now, in the doctor's opinion, where it says this line, it was beautiful. It says, this explains many things for which I could not otherwise account. I understood what some of the people in AA were talking about. It says, if you ask him why, and it says, once in a while, he may tell you the truth. And the truth, strange to say, is he usually has no idea why he took the first drink than you have. When the answer to why do you keep doing this became, I don't know, I became teachable. Because as long as I can blame it on something else, and as long as I've got an answer, I'm not open to anything. Because I already know, thanks very much, I just need to not do that again. I just need to not drink. And that just sounded awful. You ever hear that in meetings? We just don't drink one day at a time? That sounds hideous. Oh my God, I white-knuckled my way through life. I couldn't distract myself enough. And I'd always come back to it. What Alcoholics Anonymous gives me is a spiritual program of action wherein I live in the 10th step promises. The problem is removed. And as long as I stay in fit spiritual condition, which doesn't mean anything other than I try to seek and do the will of the greater good. If, God bothers a lot of people when they first get in here, it bothered me. And it's like, kind of good, right? That the idea is a big book tells me I had to disturb people about this thing called alcoholism. Well, it says, because I want to talk, especially for the new people, I didn't even understand it. It's talking about, and the truth, strange to say, is usually he has no more idea why he took the first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time. But in their hearts, they really don't know why they do it. Do you know that in my family growing up, the 3 words, I don't know, were not in our vocabulary? We had to know. I had to know everything. And if I didn't know, I could make something up on the spot, like right now, to give you the illusion that I knew. And then here's the line that's just, it gets more beautiful as time goes by. But in their hearts, they don't really know why they do it. Once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is an obsession that somehow, someday they will beat the game, but they often suspect they're down for the count. So what malady is that? The malady is the step one experience, this thing where I have no mental defense against the first drink. It's blank. I can't play the tape forward. I can't just go to meetings and get sober. I have no mental defense. It's like, you want play what? It's like, there's nothing recorded on there. And if it's recorded, it doesn't have sufficient power to prevent me from picking up the next first drink. And I love that the obsession is that I'll beat the game, because my alcoholism, I'm dying from it. I'm focused on this other outside issue. I'm seeking psychiatric help. I'm diagnosed as everything: manic depressive, bipolar, obsessive compulsive. I'm anorexic. I have all of these. My life is like always dust is flying from drama to drama, from crisis to crisis. And now it's like faced. What do you mean self-imposed crisis? I'm the victim. But I can't postpone or evade, and I meet this sponsor named Betty, and I'm finally teachable because I don't know. And I'm broken. I'm completely broken. I'm Roland Hazard. The gates of hell had clanged shut, and I heard my home group John guy say this. I call him home group John. There's always, like this one elder statesman that made such a huge impression. And he said, he was bound by chains, but he never heard the lock click shut, but it was locked. And so we only have this one key. What is the key? The key that unlocks every door for me is always going to be the key of willingness, the willingness to keep in the spiritual disciplines of 10 and 11. I have a design for living. Again, the steps aren't linear. They're expansive. I do 1 through 9, and I learned the dance steps in 1 through 9. Like, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Sometimes people are too young. I scan the screen always to find out if people even know who they are. Didn't start out dancing the way they dance. They started out with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 are my dance steps. And so 1 through 9 is something I do in the past tense. If I look at the steps on the wall, either horizontally or vertically, steps 1 through 9 on the wall are in past tense. Steps 10, 11, and 12 are current. They're present tense. So I continue and I improve and I practice. And with practice, kind of really beautiful imagery the other day. It was just a picture, because spirituality is huge, right? It's all inclusive. And there's a couple of women, cartoon women, and one is there and she has like these, I think, a couple of flowers, and they're both sitting on their knees, and one is facing the other one. Kind of looked like the man on the bed. But one is going, I've never done this before. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how. And the other woman says, allow yourself to be new. Allow yourself not to know, and start where you are. And so that was just really, really beautiful, because by the time I got here broken, I was 36 years old, and I'd gotten to AA at 27, but I really didn't understand the baffling feature until that process repeated itself. What does it say on page 30? Countless vain attempts to prove. And I never looked at it that way, because I knew I couldn't drink. But what I didn't know was that I couldn't stop. So this is why it goes back to the baffling feature being, I'm going to beat the game. I'm going to this, I'm going to that. My sponsor says, aren't you just a busy little bee, right? And figuratively, she grabbed me by the back of my shirt and sat me down and pointed me to this book and this literature. And I needed to begin to take actions I did not want to take. And I thought I was so tough. I thought I was, ambitious. No, selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of the problem. And so we progressed through the steps. I had a massive spiritual shift in perception right there in step 4, which is what it's designed to do, because in the middle of page 67, It says putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done. I grew up in alcoholism. I presented to Alcoholics Anonymous as quite the victim. I was a victim, right? Well, I didn't, right? And then the big book says, well, to conclude that other people were wrong is as far as most of us ever got. Right? So I'm stuck there. I feel stuck. Well, the resentment prayer, the only resentment prayer in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is on page 67. There's a lovely prayer in the back of the book, but that prayer is not this prayer. This prayer is very specifically designed to change me in the moment and to allow me to see myself in the perpetrators and to see the perpetrators in me. Because here it is, a prayer of empathy. To conclude that others were wrongs as far as most of us ever got. And I'd made my list. And as I went along, because I need to know, I have the great inquiring mind. As I'm reading this book, I'm beginning to study it. And it says, we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, has the power to kill. And it says, we saw these resentments must be mastered, but how? Man, because that's where I got. I got to how. How then? Began to have these things were surfacing. I wasn't drinking them away anymore. And I wasn't, you know what else I wasn't doing? I also wasn't getting busy with yard projects because I'm project queen, okay? Project queen. I'm She-Ra the warrior princess. I've got 6-pack abs and a thong tan line. Don't tell me to slow down. And my sponsor slowed me down. We talked about it earlier before I got here. My sponsor was my very first governor or governess, whatever you want to say, right? We used to drive some old pickups and an old standard transmission, right? And they've got a governor so that the engine doesn't blow up. And you can sit there in neutral and floor it, right? Just absolutely punch it. And the engine's going fast. But there reaches a point in the newer vehicles that there's a governor inside that engine. And it prevents an explosion. It prevents the motor from blowing up. I didn't have that. My sponsor was my first governor. She slowed me down and I hated her for it. I'd hang up the phone. She'd call her every day. I don't call anybody every day. On the inside. On the outside, I said, okay. Right? And I want to know what time because I immediately start to control. Immediately, I want to know what time. Right? So that I can do all of my life, come and check in and do this one thing. And you know what she did? She wouldn't tell me. Oh, whatever time's okay for you. Oh my God, I'd wake up the following morning with the only thing I didn't want to do that day was call her. Because I have to focus on stuff I don't want to focus on. And that's the 12 steps. You see, because I tried to outrun life before I came here. I tried to outrun it. Many people live by self-propulsion. And so we progress to this place and I make that list and I'm reading this book and it says we saw that the resentments must be mastered, but how? We couldn't wish them away and I tried. Here was our course. This is the crux. The essence of Alcoholics Anonymous is this prayer. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. And y'all are telling me I'm spiritually bankrupt and I don't even have a spiritual life. But all of a sudden, and it says I didn't like their symptoms and the way they disturb me, but they, and here's the 2 words, like ourselves, were sick too. 2. In addition to, as well as, and all of a sudden, I can tell you that there was a massive shift in the way I could see things. There was no more separation. I don't know how else to say it. There was no more separation. I went into my inventory as a victim and I came out the perpetrator. I got free of the resentment in between column 3 and column 4 by applying this prayer. And it says, they, like ourselves, were sick too. So we ask God I don't have a relationship with God, but I could see the need for it. Alcoholics Anonymous never sold God to me. They sold me the need for it. And that's the difference. And I love that. I love that about AA. If everything that you're doing is working for you, then rock on, bop till you drop, says Mark H., right? But if it's not, and you're convinced, being convinced on page 60 that a life run on self-will could hardly be a success, and I had to admit that. So then it goes on, says, we ask God to help us show them the tolerance, pity meaning compassion, not the kind where I look down, oh, those poor, pitiful, sick people. That's not what this prayer is about. Compassion and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man, how can I be helpful? God save me from being angry. God save me from being angry. And so to dispel the myth that we don't pray for ourselves, it says we don't pray for our selfish ends. But this prayer is very clear, and so are many of the other prayers in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? God grant me serenity, courage, and wisdom. God save me from being angry. God help me to show them. Right? So I start opening this dialogue with this power greater than myself, and it was an amazing, transformative experience, was still just the beginning. I still need, but I could see things completely differently. And so I heard a guy say in a meeting, and I had to write it down. It was just beautiful because I butcher it every time. So I'm going to read my little note that I wrote. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service to those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. This is where we become one, this whole. I become happily and usefully whole, and my entire life is on a different plane. When my thinking is cleared of wrong motives, and it goes from there. It opened like Place and Bill's story. I'm almost done. The Place and Bill's story where he says common sense became uncommon sense. A whole new world came into view. This is no joke. Done the way it's described in this book. And when I focus on this one thing, the rest of the things have a tendency to die of neglect. Right? And so I would beg of everybody here to pay very close attention to singleness of purpose. I was always taught that a duality of identification implies a duality of purpose in a single purpose program. AA does one thing, and it prevents another little girl many times from watching her mother die. So I always, when I sponsor young women especially, I look at that and I see a future mom and the future children. And so, yeah, we're here today to keep AA intact. And the only place I know to find out what AA is in AA literature, the forward to the 4th edition. The literature preserves the integrity of the AA message. And so the pamphlets, the A group, where it all begins, problems other than alcohol, a member's eye view. We have the most beautiful literature. Language of the heart, and AA comes of age. I'm a part of something much bigger than I am. Finally, I joined the human race. So I'm super grateful for being here, for being asked to talk about the most favorite thing in my world. Is the path that led me to a power greater than me, which I call God, unquestionably. And it's not me. So I'll grow in understanding and effectiveness to the precise degree that I am able to say, I don't know. Thanks for allowing me to be here.